Accommodation. Accommodation, in the context of theology, refers to the way in which God communicates with human beings in a way that is understandable and relatable to them. It is the concept that God adapts his communication and revelation to the cultural and intellectual level of the people receiving it, so that they can better comprehend and respond to it. The idea of accommodation is rooted in the belief that God's revelation is intended for all people, regardless of their cultural, linguistic, or intellectual background. In order for this revelation to be effective, it must be communicated in a way that is understandable and relatable to the particular audience. To understand accommodation more deeply, let us dive into the dictionary explanation of this theological term. The concept of accommodation. The concept of accommodation is based on the belief that God's revelation is intended for all people, and that this revelation is communicated in a way that is accessible and relatable to the audience. This means that God adapts his communication to the cultural and intellectual level of the people receiving it. For example, in the Bible, God often uses analogies and metaphors to communicate his message. Jesus frequently used parables to teach spiritual truths, using everyday situations and objects to illustrate deeper principles. This type of communication is an example of accommodation, as it demonstrates God's willingness to meet people where they are and to communicate in a way that is relevant and understandable to them. Theological implications of accommodation. The concept of accommodation has important theological implications. It suggests that God's revelation is not limited to a particular culture or time period, but rather is intended for all people in all times and places. It also suggests that there is a diversity of ways in which God communicates his message, and that these ways are influenced by the cultural and intellectual context of the people receiving it. One of the key theological debates related to accommodation is the question of how much God accommodates to human culture and language. Some theologians believe that God's revelation is completely independent of human culture and language, while others believe that God's revelation is always shaped to some extent by the cultural and linguistic context in which it is received. Historical examples of accommodation. Accommodation has been a key concept in Christian theology for centuries. One of the earliest examples of accommodation is the way in which the Bible was translated into different languages. Early translators worked to ensure that the Bible was translated in a way that was understandable to the people receiving it, adapting the language and cultural references to the particular audience. Another example of accommodation is the way in which Christian missionaries have adapted their message to different cultures around the world. Missionaries have often worked to understand the cultural context of the people they are ministering to, and have adapted their message and methods accordingly. Conclusion. In conclusion, accommodation is a theological concept that refers to the way in which God communicates his revelation in a way that is understandable and relatable to the audience. It suggests that God adapts his communication to the cultural and intellectual level of the people receiving it, in order to make his message more accessible and relevant to them. This concept has important implications for understanding the diversity of ways in which God communicates his message, and the role of culture and language in shaping our understanding of God's revelation. Bible verses. Psalm chapter 145:9 The Lord is good to all, and his mercy is over all that he has made. Isaiah chapter 55:8 For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. Romans chapter 15:4 For whatever was written in former days was written for our instruction, that through endurance and through the encouragement of the Scriptures we might have hope. Corinthians chapter 1:20 For all the promises of God find their yes in him. That is why it is through him that we utter our amen to God for his glory. Peter chapter 1:25 But the word of the Lord remains forever. And this word is the good news that was preached to you.